Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating and totally accidental 10,000-year history of how cats basically domesticated themselves. For most of human history, cats were completely irrelevant to us. They were really just small predators hunting mice in the dark, totally indifferent to human existence. But somehow, out of all the animals humans could have domesticated, these independent little hunters ended up practically everywhere.
I mean, think about it. Today, there are over 600 million domestic cats on Earth. They're sleeping on our laptops, knocking glasses off tables just for the fun of it, and, let's face it, absolutely dominating the internet. But here's the wild part. We never actually planned for this. Nobody ever sat down and decided to intentionally bring them indoors.
So, the very first thing we need to dismantle today is this grand myth that we chose to tame these solitary hunters. We love to think we actively selected them, right? That we trained them and brought them into the fold, just like we did with dogs or horses. But honestly, they domesticated themselves, and we barely even noticed what was happening until they were already sound asleep on our furniture.
Part 1. The Grain Store Truce.
So this whole story kicks off about 10,000 years ago, with what's arguably the most transformative moment in human history, the agricultural revolution. Before farming, we were hunter-gatherers, constantly on the move, meaning we really couldn't stockpile food. But once we stopped moving and started hoarding surplus grain in clay jars and wooden containers to survive the winters, well, it sparked a massive chain reaction. All that stored grain immediately drew an absolute flood of mice and rats to our settlements. Just one pair of mice can produce hundreds of offspring in a single year, literally eating through months of hard-earned harvests. And right on the heels of those rodents, you guessed it, feline predators looking for an easy meal.
This specific predator that answered the call was Felis sylvestris libica. Now, these early cats were deeply suspicious, fiercely independent, highly efficient killing machines that just so happened to be roughly the size of a large loaf of bread. But they had this one massive advantage over animals like wolves. They were already living in the exact same ecosystems as these early farmers. They spotted this huge artificial concentration of prey swarming our food stores, and they simply capitalized on a free buffet. Humans saw them wiping out the mice, and, well, obviously nobody chased them away.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates how cats diverged from pretty much every other domestic animal in history. While we were spending thousands of years meticulously breeding dogs, horses, sheep, and cattle for very specific traits, cats were just doing their own thing. They literally selected themselves. It was entirely based on who was brave enough to hunt near the human firelight. We weren't choosing which cats reproduced. The cats were completely in charge of their own genetics.
Over generations, this invisible, slow pressure of survival started shaping these animals. The slightly less terrified wildcats, the ones that didn't just panic and bolt the second a human looked at them, well, they got the best access to the mice. Because they were bold enough to stay close, they ate way better, they survived a lot longer, and they naturally passed that slightly reduced fear down to their kittens. It was just this incredibly gradual evolution of mutual tolerance.
Part 2. From Pests to Gods. Now, fast forward to about 4,000 years ago in Egypt, where this relationship undergoes a truly massive transformation. The level of societal devotion the ancient Egyptians had for cats is just mind-blowing. I mean, if a household cat died, the entire family would actually shave their eyebrows in deep mourning. We've even uncovered these massive cemeteries containing millions of mummified cats, all preserved as offerings to the goddess Bastet. And their legal system? It was so incredibly strict that harming a cat, even completely by accident, could literally result in execution. That is a wild shift, right? Going from just having a pest controller nearby to outright religious worship.
But you've got to ask, why did this happen in Egypt specifically? Well, this intense worship was directly tied to the sheer, incredible scale of grain production in the Nile Valley. We're talking about a civilization that was completely dependent on massive, massive amounts of stored food to survive. And with that much food comes an unprecedented rodent threat. So as a society, they had every logical reason in the world to fiercely protect and culturally elevate the one animal that was single-handedly safeguarding their entire food supply.
And of course, cats were definitely smart enough to recognize a golden opportunity when they saw one. If you look at Egyptian art from this period, it depicts them comfortably lounging inside busy households, wearing collars, eating from actual bowls. They essentially realized they had struck the ultimate evolutionary bargain. Humans were highly useful to them. We provided warmth, safety, and a very reliable food source. And in return, literally all the cat had to do was allow itself to be occasionally petted. A pretty good deal if you ask me.
Part 3. Ships, Spread, and Superstition.
From those heights of Egyptian worship, the story takes a huge, sprawling turn across the globe. Because cats were so incredibly sacred in Egypt, it was actually technically illegal to export them. The government even ran special operations to track down and retrieve smuggled felines. But honestly, it didn't matter. Phoenician, Greek, and Roman traders just kept illegally smuggling them onto their ships anyway. Why? Because the exact same logic that brought cats to grain stores applied at sea. Wooden ships carrying grain inevitably attract rats, and a rat problem absolutely demands a cat.
This global expansion eventually brings us to the immense tragedy of medieval Europe. The Black Plague absolutely devastated the continent, wiping out a staggering 30 to 60% of the human population. But an often overlooked factor in this massive historical disaster, it's the tragic, sudden shift in how humans started treating their oldest pest controllers.
In a really horrific twist of fate, the Catholic Church in certain regions started associating cats, particularly black cats, with paganism and witchcraft. This led to a widespread systematic persecution of felines across the board. Think about it. We were actively eliminating the very animal we had accidentally cultivated for 10,000 years exactly when we desperately needed them the most. With the cats gone, the rodent populations predictably exploded, and the fleas on those rodents, they carried the plague directly into human homes.
Part 4. The Modern Feline Paradox.
Bringing this history all the way back into our living rooms today. After surviving witch trials and traversing oceans on creaky wooden ships, we're left with one of the most bizarre and unique relationships in the entire animal kingdom. To really wrap our heads around this paradox, just compare them to our other best friend. Dogs were intricately shaped by us, right? They're bred to read our emotions, track where we're looking, and constantly seek our approval. When a dog does something wrong, you can see the guilt all over its face. But cats? A cat will coldly swat a glass off your table and just watch it shatter on the floor with the focused, unblinking attention of a scientist conducting a gravity experiment. It just perfectly highlights their hilariously wild, stubbornly independent nature. And, there's a very real scientific reason for that attitude. Because humans never really actively bred them, the modern domestic cat is genetically almost identical to its wild ancestors. Literally, if you were to take your pampered house cat, the one currently snoring on your laptop keyboard, and drop it right back into the North African wild, it would probably survive perfectly well, because genetically speaking, it never actually changed. Deep down, it is still just a fierce little wildcat that just so happens to enjoy heated blankets and free meals.
But honestly, that is the true genius of the cat. They successfully convinced us to care for them, feed them, and absolutely adore them, all without ever putting in the intense behavioral adaptations we demanded from other pets. They just exist perfectly in this strange liminal space right between wild and tame. They play entirely by their own rules, they maintain their own highly private schedules, and somehow they manage to turn their aloof independence into an incredibly lovable charm. With cats, their wildness is a feature, it's absolutely not a flaw. So, what you should really take away from this explainer is a brand new appreciation for that tiny little predator pacing around your living room. The next time your cat is staring blankly at a wall at 3 a.m., totally ignoring you when you call its name, or just going about its own incomprehensible private agenda, I want you to look back at those ancient grain stores and ask yourself the ultimate question. After 10,000 years of us providing warm homes, free food, and endless devotion to an animal that never even bothered to change its genetics for us, who really domesticated who?